computer. Yes, I'm now recording. So we can share. So we're back to your article, giveaway. We should say Dennis giving away the farm part 2 here. This is the RBs and your philosophy, and you give the secret stuff. I do want to say that a couple of things. First, here is Science of Fantasy. You can see the quarterback, the RBs, the wide receivers, and the tight end articles already up. We will cover those. I even showed Dennis's beta first 48 safe picks. He's going to give me more, but I went ahead and put up what he gave me. And then this, Dennis, is ADP versus touch at the weekly level. And folks, this is hours of data. And I don't know if it's, yeah. So here's all my video lessons, part 1, 2, 3, 4, 4B, C, and then the actual hard copy of all my figures I go over in each one of those. Look, it's sad because my internet can't keep up with how many figures there are. Dennis, see, it never ends. The data, the party goes on forever, and the data never ends here. So if you will listen to me, I will go through and actually start with the data and put a context, and then use eventually I will hit the player level, team by team player, and I will discuss ADP in the context of all the data, because that is our point of reference. That's how we get value. And if you see two players that are in way different ADPs, the cheaper player gets my attention. Doesn't mean I'm automatically going to draft them, but it gets my attention. So right now, at the end of June, I'm looking for potential players to get hard on, have a hard on for in August, mid-August, after the expo. I got to figure out who the people, in my opinion, as an analyst, are missing. And I use my data metrics as a landscape to make those forecast predictions. And you can see all my lesson plans. It's a lot to go through. Very few go through it. I got it. Very few are going to take the time, and that's fine, because very few, only 1 out of 12 can win in leagues I play in. So people are not, some are going to win by luck, but the people that want to get better, I'm teaching you how to fish, folks, because it's my process. Okay, maybe you like it, maybe you don't. Use your diary to figure it out. Anyway, Dennis, I've got that as well, and I've got some secret stuff that I hadn't even put out yet on ADPs, my figures of the visuals. Let's see if it will show that. Yeah, so visuals of ADPs and ADP sectors and fantasy points per game. I'm not using all our weekly tools yet, because I'm going to update our ADP, and I'll regenerate that. It'll be the 3rd generation so far. Dennis, I will have that in the next 2 weeks, and we'll have updated ADPs versus our MVP, our COM, your best, your weekly value, my Bush figure, all that's coming, folks. But this is just the data here. And so, Dennis, I did want to talk a little bit about this. Then I wanted to get to your article. And I'll give you the overview here of running backs and the segments, ADP segments in cuts of 6. And this is the last 4 years. I've got data all the way back, some case year 2000, but I like to have fresh data in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So that's why I stopped at 2020. So the last 4 years, and you can see the y-axis is fantasy points per game, x-axis is the ADP sectors, and the bar represents the average over the 4 years. And then the pink line is the trend. And the orange line, Dennis, is the top and bottom of my famous box here. If you take all the sectors here, which this is that data, and I'll have that, the sectors, and you can see that it's not the same, right? It goes down over time, right? It decays. And so I have a box, and that kind of tells me things. I can see the best and the worst, and overall. And so the orange line shows you how broad, for instance, RBs are. If we looked at quarterbacks, and I think see, yeah, look how narrow quarterbacks are, Dennis. Same process.
I'm not seeing the data here.
Oh, you're not seeing the data.
Okay. All I'm seeing is
okay.
the graphic.
Okay. Well, let me try to share again. So are you seeing it now?
There we go.
Okay. Here is the QB box and whisker, the orange lines here, and notice the range of typical quarterbacks are in here. And I was showing at RBs wider range.
Wow.
Yeah. So folks realize right away that's the landscape. When you're drafting RBs, the range within each 6 ADP sector is going to be broad overall. Okay, we can get into stacked sectors, which I do have, and I can talk about that. So that's what's work. We've got to beat this, Dennis. That quarterbacks, in some ways, we've got a lot of safety nets, right? You can even get the 8th or 9th best and still not be too bad compared to some of your league mates. Yeah, if they got the best, they'll probably be, 5-6 points a week on a weekly basis better than you, but at least you're not just so far out of it that you have no shot, right? And but with RBs, consider the box the margin of error, big.
So here's an interesting thing when you look at this sloping line, Professor.
Yeah.
It shows that, first of all, when you look at this, intuitively, the concept of zero RB is blown out of the water because there is definitely an advantage to having an elite running back. But
with
then
the caveat,
zero RB,
Dennis, with the caveat that you're one of the few,
yes,
that can beat the overall trend.
Yeah, well, you have to be.
You have to be that much good. You have to be that much better to make it work.
You have to catch the safe guys.
Right, the lightning in the bottle kind of concept. Yep.
And over the last couple of years, my pick of safe RBs in the first round has been generally pretty small. This year, the number totals 4. That's it.
And 4. I will tell you that historically, that's the best by, a nice shot.
Yep. 4 is the most I have had in the last 4 seasons. If I go back last year, there were 2. The year before that, I believe there were 2. The year before that, I had that number at 3. I'm very picky on guys earning a spot in that safe group of 4. And even among the safe group of 4, there's an ultra safe group of 2. But what this chart also tells you is don't wait too long at RB. Like you can,
yeah, it shows, Dennis, 24th ADP pick. It's going to start getting lean.
Yes. And what it shows you is that you get way out there past 100.
Oh yeah,
and you're just flailing at that point.
You're looking for that rare Puka type player out of nowhere. And usually Dennis is better than zero. His argument would be rookie RBs that nobody really knows yet. So if you
Yes.
draft enough of them, right? If I get enough of them, one of them or two are going to pay off and I'll have something.
And it's a philosophy difference when you get later in the draft. It's, can this guy help me for 2 or 3 games?
Yes,
Versus, is he going to be a good season long guy? So,
exactly.
yeah. So having the volume, having 9 running backs on your roster to choose from in a typical redraft league, for me, that's how many I have. I mean, if I can get 9 guys, I'm thrilled. And usually 2 of those are a backup to guys I already drafted.
Yep.
Because you have to own your own. Like, if you've got a stud and you can back him up
Yep.
with the guy that you know is going to be the backup, and that's not always the case. Look at San Francisco this year. Who's the backup to CMC? Logic tells you next man up should be Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, public says that, but there's a rookie out there that I've
Isaac
actually been,
Guerrero.
yeah, I've
Guerrero.
actually been
Yep.
hoarding him in the 18th. Well, actually, probably he's been going up in values, a
Oh,
little
yes,
bit
he
harder to
is.
get him
Yep.
than I like.
And that's when it gets tough, is because there is no well-defined guy
Nope.
who's going to be that backup. So I'll take a shot at the rookie because I'm getting him cheap, but now he's starting to move up the draft board. This is why you have to keep a constant eye on ADP as well.
Yep.
It's not good enough, in my opinion, to just look at the static ADP from when you're drafting. You have to have an idea of how that's evolved over the last month or two to really understand it, because, and you have to understand the variability of ADP as well,
Oh,
because the ADP is a hard number.
yeah.
And maybe a guy's average drafting position is 19.6.
Yep.
He's going as the 19.6 pick, but he might be going as early as 7, as late as 30. You need to look at that variability to really put ADP to good use for you. But these charts tell you,
Yeah,
that the better than zero philosophy is probably accurate, because after we get past the first few elite guys,
yeah.
it gets a little tougher.
Are you seeing this data?
Yes.
Okay. So what I did, and I've got the hard copy of all this data here, this first 24. I did the box and whisker within the segment. So what you saw here was the whole
Right.
gamut. And then I start cherry picking sectors, and then I put it here so you can look at them together and
Oh,
notice the scale has to be pretty close, right? I probably
right.
should. This is close to 35. So uh, it shows you, look at the first, this is, what is this? This is 48. I guess that's why I hadn't published this yet, because I hadn't, looks like I didn't do. I'm gonna have to figure this out, then. You know, it's always think I'm ready, but I'm not. But anyway, this may be a better way to look at it. Actually have the boxes, the top and bottoms for all the sectors and RBs, and I plotted the tops in blue, the average. I'm sorry, the average is in pink, the orange is in the bottom of the box, and the top is the blue. So you can, and moving across the ADP sectors there. And this is the actual data. And you can start seeing, look at the range of 49 to 78.
Wow.
2 is your bottom. 79 to 103, 109 and 1. So worst case scenario, you have been wrecked by your picks here. Looks like the first 48 worst case, you may got a 6 points a week. It's not compared to your other choices. I kind of like know what's the worst case scenario. It's 12, 7, looks like about 2. And that, folks, it starts expiring quick. Yeah, I know there's upside, but at some point, 109, when the upside's 13, which is close to the downside of the first 24.
Wow.
So you know, and the range actually gets the highest in the 49 to 78 historically. So you can see, and then it kind of, and then it's pretty much, there's not a lot of range here, 109 to 156. So you need to understand the landscape in your draft. This is data that I present beforehand, and Dennis gets a copy of this. And so Dennis, there's my data. Let me stop
Yeah,
sharing and I'll get back to your article.
yeah,
And
and
we can,
Professor, I could point out that if you are a strict zero RB guy and don't take a running back until the 5th round or later,
yep,
you have painted yourself into the corner.
you better be damn good, Dennis. Your
You
diary
gotta
better say, I
you
made money
gotta be
doing this.
you gotta be perfect at what you're doing because your margin for error has increased considerably. Now, you know my theory,
Yep.
which I'm explaining here. I love to have an elite running back, but I define that term a lot narrower than
Yeah,
most people
and
do.
I do love your articles at the end, folks. He defines his terms, and that is so rare these days. Uh, Here's zero RB. Uh, my definition includes 5th round or more before I take an RB.
Yep.
That's my definition. I don't know how. It's kind of like sitting on the old chair and it's somebody's is going to explode. How long do you sit on that chair before you get up and do something? And it's kind of almost a tricky game. How far do you ignore RBs before you reach it? And see, my argument is if you go in with a zero RB and you kind of don't have some historical confidence based on your diary, then I think you're going to start getting loosey goosey. You're going to start getting worried. People are drafting them. They're coming off the board. And you're thinking, that 4th round RB, oh, it just left. Oh my God, I have no pot, and you get panicked and then you're just grabbing. Folks, when you're making this kind of extreme move versus away from the ADP, and I'm not saying it won't work. No, it's just you better be mentally prepared that things are not what you think's going to happen probably won't. And there's going to be some crazy drunks in your league and they're going to be crazy and they're going to do something you're not going, I don't know what it's going to be. Pick 2 quarterbacks in the 2nd round, or whatever. They're just going, it's going to get crazy somehow. And if you're sitting there and all of a sudden things are going crazy, are you going to still stick to your plans? Versus an adaptive discussion that Dennis is proposing here and in other philosophy articles, where you definitely understand the landscape, but you move with the flow, right? If you're planting and the corn's doing bad over here and it's dying, you don't just sit there and not do something. Okay, maybe I better fertilize a little more, or maybe I better check the soil for neem, something versus, oh, I'm just, I'm okay. I'm going to let it burn down. And no. You got to change with it. And if things are getting crazy, being adaptive is your friend versus having a, damn it, I'm not leaving until I get what I want. Well, you may not get what you want. So anyway, Dennis takes you through the rules of thumb on best ball, dynasty, uh, redraft, and strategy over time and things. And it's very enlightening. All your philosophy articles, folks, you got to have, and I'm going to put my ADP and fantasy points. That's coming. So I think if you bounce between the data and listening to me versus going back to Dennis and you kind of synthesize them together, multiple data streams are the best way to beat fantasy football. Is you're not locked into anything. It's kind of like you're a bee and you're sampling different flowers looking for the pollen. That's what our beta test is doing. And I will admit, we do have secret stuff that you're probably not going to get to sample. Sorry. But hey, we will tease and talk a little bit about in the season. I think we're going to really try to get a little Vegas in our gas tank for making some props and trying to set our lineups even more than we've done in the past. And I'm looking forward to this. Of course, I'm ready. You know, if somebody said let's do the season starts in 2 weeks, I'm ready to go, folks. Are you ready? You know, that kind of thing. So anyway, Dennis, you know, I'm a professor. I can run my mouth all day. Tell me your basic declaration and anything else, and take us through these different techniques and things you discuss in this great article.
Well, thanks first of all for the compliments on the article. It's interesting because when you force yourself to explain your strategy, you end up understanding why you do what you do better and how that has evolved over time, because I cannot get around that whole thing. If you're still playing fantasy football the same way you were 5 years ago, if you have not adapted your style to what is happening out there in the fantasy football world, I can guarantee your ROI is going down. Because every year that you are not, it's like being in a draft. If you start the run on a particular position, you're probably in better shape with your team than if you ended the run. You're getting more value when you're starting a run at a position. And then when the run happens, you already have that position locked up. So the rest of the picks in front of you are making other valuable players fall farther. If you're not understanding that simple part of the drafting philosophy, then you're already causing yourself a chance to win more. Everything that I explain in this article is how I do it for 2024. This is how I'm going to approach the position for this year. But if you read this, Professor, you will see I don't say take 2 running backs before the 5th round or whatever. It's always, the strategy is always decided by what else is going on in the draft, because your goal is not to win one position. The goal is to always win your matchup at the end of the week. And if you apply this logic for each position, if you apply my logic, first of all, you'll be a little different than the rest of your league mates, and different can be an advantage. And number 2, you'll have a strategy that can do just as well if there's 7 0 RB aficionados in your league, or if there's none. Like you will be able to roll with the punches to always be fielding your best team. There have been best ball drafts this year, Professor, where I went into the draft with the theory, okay, I'm going to wait a little bit at running back. If I don't get CMC or Bijan Robinson or Jamar Gibbs, I'm going to wait a little bit at running back because I see my targets at different places in the draft. But here's the key, Professor. Even though I've got 5 guys that I target later in drafts at running back, I don't want to wait to get those 5 guys because I understand the whole concept of risk reward. I understand that the farther you go in ADP, as we saw with your data, the farther you go down the draft, the more variability there is through those middle rounds, and the lower the bad results are.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm taking a running back in the first 24 picks of my draft, I know my worst case is 11.6 a game. Maybe that's not something I can win with, but it's certainly something I'm not going to lose with. So if my worst running back, let's say if I take 2 in the first 2 rounds and my worst 2 picks, I grab the worst 2 guys. That's 23 points a week out of my running back position. I can be competitive against anybody in the league because I'm close enough. And that's if I'm the worst. Imagine if I'm number 1 and 2 out of that group. Then I built myself a huge advantage. So your strategy at running back has to change depending on where you are drafting in a draft. If I'm drafting first, I'm grabbing a running back in a non-super flex league. If it's a 1 QB league and I've got one of the first 3 draft picks, I'm probably taking one of my safe running backs. And that research by you says that that's the right move.
Historically, it is. I went further back to like 2013. And historically, if I look at WRs and RBs, it's a little bit, it's not, it's close on what it is, but the data would tend to shift WR first, RB second round. That's kind of the deal. And if you want a balance, you can be aggressive and take WR, but then the data would suggest you're going to have to be good for that. Is that I don't know, the dead zone this year? The dead zone, what does that mean? Okay, and what's dead this year? Can I make it alive? I don't know. Anyway, let me add some electricity to it, make it alive, some ADP to it. Again, or should you do RB? Traditionally, under the bell cow years, you're doing RB, and everybody's sad that didn't get one. And they figure, well, I'll lose. After about the first couple of rounds, people are thinking I've lost because I don't have, the some of those old classic bell cow guys that people used to have. And it's been such a long time since you had one. I forget. I know I used to love Jamal Charles.
Oh, yeah.
But Matt Forte, some of those guys way back, and I know there's some other one, more classic ones. You're saying, well, Dr. Bush, I think you're a professor. You don't remember? Hey, I'm old. I got too much to think about. So don't tell me. That's why I have books and data so I can go back and refresh myself. And when I go into drafts, Dennis, I've thought about things before. So anyway, why don't you tell me about redraft rule of thumb? Let's hit that.
Yeah, in redraft, it's pretty simple because I do use this better than zero philosophy, where my position in the draft will dictate to me what position I lead with more than anything else. I mean, I rarely will take a tight end in the first round, but I have.
It's been
Kelsey.
rare historically too, Dennis. No
Yeah,
quarterbacks,
no
only
quarterbacks. Yeah,
Kelsey in a few years, I think 2 years.
yeah. So
Not last year, but
yeah,
it was
so
close last year. Yeah.
yeah. So I go into the draft with the strategy first round.
Yep.
I've got my safe this year. We're talking this year. I got my safe 4 running backs. The guys that I really like this year that I consider safe picks.
Yep.
And it's very small. It's CMC, it's Breece Hall, it's Bijan Robinson, and it's Jamar Gibbs. Those are the only 4 running backs that I really am considering as safe picks in that first round. Once 3 of those 4 are gone, it starts affecting how I'm going to play that first round. Not all 4. Like, I don't want the 4th best running back necessarily if I can have the 1st best wide receiver. I want to maximize having the elite at as many positions as possible. And by elite, in this case, I mean guys that are going to have an MVP score over 100. That's usually 12 of both running backs and wide receivers. So in theory, if I outdraft the pack, I can end up with 2 of those running backs or 2 of those wide receivers, maybe 1 of each. If I'm really lucky, maybe I get 3 of those. If I'm extremely lucky, maybe I end up with 4. So the whole idea is I don't care what position they're from. I want the best player that I can have early in the draft. And if that means I go running back in the first 3 rounds, I don't care. If that's where the draft value is, let's say I've got 11 0 RB guys that I'm drafting against, and all they're taking is wide receivers, I'm going to get hammered at the wide receiver position, but I'm going to end up with the 3 best running backs in the league. Obviously, it never gets to that extreme, but what if it did? You need to be able to adjust your draft strategy until that point. In a typical league, in redraft, I end up with more running backs than wide receivers. It's almost, I would say, 95% of the redraft leagues I'm in. If you look at my roster, I'll have 1, 2, or 3 more running backs than wide receivers. My goal is in a typical 20 round, 20 team or 7 bench player leagues, which are common. I want to have 6 or 7 running backs and 4 or 6 wide receivers. But I have had the extreme where I've had 8 or 9 running backs. And I've had 4 wide receivers. And I've had 1 quarterback, 1 tight end. I never have. Every one of my rosters, if you look at 10 redraft rosters, all 10 of those rosters will be slightly different. But the ranges will be the same. I'll have more running backs than wide receivers, and I'll usually get my wide receivers pretty early. I will wrap up my 4 wide receivers before I start getting into my more speculative running back picks. But you need to be able to change on a fly because you don't know how your competition is going to draft. So in best ball, even this year, I've had weeks or drafts where I said, okay, I'm gonna fade the running back position after I get 1 or 2 really good ones.
So in best ball, what are we doing different? I jumped dynasty to go into best ball.
Yeah.
Since you
So
brought it up.
best ball, my running back and my wide receiver, like I
Right.
said, in redraft, almost every one of my teams, the high percentage of my teams will have more running backs to wide receivers. In best ball, it'll be a little more even. But the concept is the same. Draft the best player available. And I don't really care if I end up with first 10 rounds, for instance, if I end up with 6 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and 1 quarterback after 10 rounds,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that in a 1 quarterback league. It'll all even itself out in the end, but I tend to have a little closer between running backs and wide receivers versus redraft, where I definitely skew to the RBs. And in best ball, I have a habit of being a 3 quarterback and a 3 tight end guy.
Mm-hmm.
My results tell me that I've been better doing that. The other success that I like to use in best ball is I like to have both ends of the backfield.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, if I could, if the ADP allowed it, if that particular draft allowed it, I wouldn't mind drafting Chase Brown and Zach Moss with Cincinnati. I wouldn't mind drafting Joe Mixon early and handcuffing with Dameon Pierce. I use that more in best ball than in any other format.
Gotcha.
I want to own a backfield in best ball because in best ball versus redraft, you always have waivers available. Most best ball leagues, you are stuck with the players that you draft at the beginning of the season. So in those situations where I cannot make changes to pick up a new player,
Yep.
I want to have both ends of a backfield that just gives me one starting running back almost every week.
Yeah. I'm doing Kamara, and Jamal Williams is a free square in round
Yes.
20. I mean,
Yep.
it's like, what else should I grab? Certainly CMC and the rookie, that kind of thing. Agree with you. Uh, you know, uh, yeah, I'm doing the same thing as well. Traditionally, what I've been seeing with my pattern ADP patterns, people are taking 3 QBs, 3 tight ends now. They actually weren't. They were doing some different things in May. You and I talked about that in a
Yep.
previous podcast, but now we're definitely 3-3. But WRs are still dominant over RBs in best balls in FFPC, Dennis. So the fact that you're balancing or maybe doing one more RB versus you're different, which you hope is good. Okay. So you're different than what the crowd is doing as an aggregate, right? Which is interesting. So I don't look, given RBs are more variable, I know what the box size is.
Yes.
It's hard for me to justify taking 2 or 3 WRs and 2 or 3 less RBs in a best ball. It just, I just got in my head, it's like box of matches, and all of a sudden, here's the last box. And what am I going to do when I run out? And I kind of see my RBs that way, like bowling pins, and I can see through the season, you start losing them a lot quicker than the WRs. And I don't understand why people ignore that uncertainty and go the other way. WRs tend to be safer as a group than RBs. The data just is pretty unequivocal about it. It's there. So I don't understand. It confuses me. I think in one last thing, in FFPC, the pros tend at the back end, Dennis, to be giving you the end of the season, the seasonal points. And traditionally, the 6th RB WR is going to have more points than some of these rookie RBs because the uncertainty. In other words, they don't show you the uncertainty. If they map that,
Yes.
you would probably be picking differently. A lot of people say, oh, look, he's 100 points, and this rookie out of San Francisco, CMC's, he's 20 points. Well, hell, 100? I'm a fool if I take the 20. In other words, they can't imagine that CMC won't take a couple of weeks off or whatnot. And that's what I think they get tricked. And they don't understand the uncertainty and the box and whisker and the data, and it gets confused to them.
And here's one thing that I have noticed in the data, and I think this is the reason that people go more wide receivers than running backs. If you look at the consistency of the top 30 at each position, the running backs are more consistent in my statistics as far as reaching that 10-point minimum PPR than the wide receivers. But what people don't understand is that's sort of not true for the elite guys. Okay. So your elite wide receivers are just as consistent as your elite wide running backs.
Yes.
It's the farther you go down that level that the guys get more inconsistent at wide receiver. And that's why I think they look at it and they say, okay, I'm going to have more of them because they're more inconsistent. Where the reality is, I want to have more running backs because I'm looking at the weekly value of these players. And a lot of times my 19th and 20th round running back is a guy that's only going to get out there if there are injuries or there's missed games.
Or
Or
they're at the playoffs and okay, let's throw
yeah,
the rookie out here and see what we got for the last 2-3 games, which
correct.
can collect, that can put you over the top and put you in the money, Dennis.
Last year, I had a lot of Ty Chandler and Zamir White.
Yep.
A lot of them. They were my late round go-tos, along with Malik Davis from Dallas. Those were my
Who?
three
Yeah.
most
Who?
often owned
Yeah.
running backs
Yeah.
late in a draft. You're not going to hit them all. But I also had Kyron Williams in there
Yep.
as one of my later round guys. So he hit right away. Ty Chandler and Zamir White hit for the playoffs, and Malik Davis is still waiting to hit. He's probably
Yeah.
doing
He's
well.
still down there.
He's
Waiting.
still there. But the key is you're going to miss. But who cares if you miss? Because, you know, Zamir White had 4 really good games at the end of the year. Ty Chandler had a couple, 3 games good at the end of the year.
Yep.
I'm going to collect on those late picks at running back more than I'm going to connect with my 4th wide receiver on a team who might score more points during the season, total points, as the 3rd or 4th wide receiver on a team. So yearly, he scored many more points than Zamir White or Ty Chandler. But he didn't hit my best ball roster. He scored maybe once or twice during the year that he made it as a starter, as a qualifying player at the end of the day for that week, versus a Zamir White who was there for 4 out of 4 when he got his chance. So I look at the game different from a weekly basis instead of a year-end point basis, because a year-end point guy who scored, let's say, 100 points for you, he didn't produce much for you at all. Yep. When it comes right down to it on a weekly basis. If you're averaging 5 or 6 points, he's not making my best ball team, unless the rest of my best ball team really sucked. Versus a running back who might only score 100 points for the whole season. But 90% of those points came in 6 games.
Yep.
That's the guy I want on my team. So that's the philosophy going in, is I'm taking running backs in the last few rounds of a draft that I don't really care. They may not make it on the field at all. But if there's injuries, if there's a replacement, they will. But you're going to hit.
It's not the if, it's the when you're going to get in. It's just,
yeah.
Did you choose the right team and players?
Correct.
Yeah. You're going to get, or we are going to, I don't know who, I can't predict the future yet. I need my Skynet to help me predict it.
You need the Terminator to take out the starter on the right team.
I do. No, we're not going to be bad like that. We're not going to root for injuries.
But
Bad,
no,
Dennis.
that's my difference of philosophy in best ball versus redraft.
What about Dynasty? I know we're going, uh, doing this on a Sunday. Dennis and I are relaxed and we just want to sit here and talk all damn day about fantasy football. And you know what keeps us interesting? I know some of our competitors is they kind of wind down. If I wanted to, I could crank up some more of my data and it would fire Dennis back up and we could talk another hour about, I mean, I could light the data fuse and we could just keep going a position. I've got the tight ends done, the wide receivers. We could get all sorts of goodness in my touch metrics. We could get all sorts of goodness happening. But give us the key points on Dynasty because you love your startup. Win now, Dennis, not win later.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me
Eh,
about your RBs with the win now concept.
So my main startup for a dynasty, there's two separate strategies going on in one. Um, First of all, I don't care about the older guys because they're going to drop in ADP to perfect positions for me. But brand new dynasty startup that I was drafting it and I noticed the trends of what was happening. And I don't have a lot of running backs yet. They're 10 rounds of the draft. But the ones I got are relatively young guys who shouldn't have that big a competition for touches this year. I've got Isaiah Pacheco from Kansas City. I got DeAndre Swift from Chicago. I feel really good about both of those guys that I can build around them. But again, you know, I will end up having a lot more running backs than wide receivers because one of my favorite things to do when it comes to dynasty and running backs is on roster cut day. I will add all the guys who make a roster. So last year it was Emil DeMarcado for Arizona Cardinals. It was, Jaleel McLaughlin for Denver. Those guys were out there in almost every league. They had less than 10% ownership in large roster dynasty on cut day. Those were the guys that I'll hoard. I'll add a ton of them. My other favorite thing to do is to trade for guys that were failures in their first year or two. And so, by trading for guys that have not done much, you end up with the Kyren Williams, where you just magically hit on a guy. The reason I targeted Williams in drafts or in trades, I should say, after his failed rookie year was because I had no faith in Cam Akers. It wasn't because I thought Kyren Williams would be a top 6 running back in fantasy football. It was because I knew that Cam Akers wouldn't be a starter for the whole season. And so I traded a lot for Kyren Williams. I offered, late second round picks, early third round picks, and people were gobbling it up because he was so lousy. He didn't do anything. Same with Ty Chandler, Zamir White. You could get them for a third round or a fourth round pick last year because people, for some reason, think that it's better to get a third or fourth round pick. But guys like Malik Davis, Jaleel McLaughlin, Amari DeMarcado, they were all available on waivers. So they were free. And I don't care if they hit or not. Like, I'm getting rid of either injured players. I'm putting them on my IR. I'm putting guys that are not starting yet on my taxi squad. So I had a lot of Ty Chandler. I had a lot of Kyren Williams sitting on my taxi squad from the year before because I was able to trade for them or pick them up for really cheap or off of waivers before they had done anything. That's the key at running back. is you grab them before they do anything, and that's the key, I think, to my success there. Then the other thing that I love to do is I love to draft the rookie running backs that are not thought of as being all that great. I like to grab them in my rookie drafts. So typically from the third and fourth rounds in my rookie drafts, there'll almost always be running backs. Guys this year like Rasheen Ali. I was taking Ray Davis before he moved up the roster, and you had to take him in the second round. Early rookie drafts, he was going in the third round, and even pretty late in the third round. Now he's moved up to the second round of more recent rookie drafts. But the key is I draft a lot of them. I draft a lot of running backs. I put a ton of running backs on the roster, just hoping I can roster somebody in there. I will not often trade for high-end running backs. They're expensive. They cost you down the road. And the second year of when you hit that second contract, that's when I think you age out quicker than anything else. And before you respond, got to take a quick break. Commotion at the door.
That's okay. That's okay. We're probably wound down anyway, huh, Dennis? Because we've been going for a while. I did want to just mention, and when is your Scott Fishbowl draft?
That is coming up on the 14th.
Okay, so we still got another show because
Yes.
I generated just some patterns on some ADPs that are out there and some things, and I had some questions. I'm not in it this year. I'm all in is trying to help you get an advantage there. So I think maybe next week we need a little bit of time to look at the patterns. I got some questions for things you're thinking about as you approach that. And I think there may be others that were interested in the Scott Fishbowl as well. But the patterns are out there, folks. Suggest you go find them. Dennis will be drafting with those patterns. And you're saying, well, he's going to follow them. Look, all as his support, as his tech support, I've given him the things to look at. He has to make the final. He has to actually be the analyst and pull the trigger. But if you don't have that, your success levels are not as great. So I'm hoping I'm going to inspire a little bit deeper thinking. Dennis promised me he will not be hitting the fifth of Jack Daniels live at the draft, and he's going to go be sober and got his teeth filed down to chew up his league mates and crush them like the bugs that I know he's going to make them to be. And it's kind of like wrestling. I'm going to see him crush his opponents in the Scott Fishbowl, and I want him to go deep this year. So that's just kind of setting up for next week. We can talk tight ends. I've got my data on tight ends and then wide receiver. I don't know if we want to do both next on your strategy, your philosophy of those two. I've got the data for both positions, so we can throw that in the mix as well for next week.
That sounds like a great idea, Professor. And I think there are some, I'm just going to tease this out there.
Okay.
I think there are some wrong assumptions being made by brilliant minds in the fantasy football world. I believe
this is Fishbowl
for the Scott Fishbowl.
Okay.
I have seen a few people that I think are some of the most brilliant minds in fantasy football that are telling people based on the rules, because you only have to start one running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 quarterback, a super flex, and the rest are all flex positions this year,
including kickers.
including kickers,
Yep.
because of the way that the rules are set. I'm seeing some people saying that wide receivers will be less advantageous to roster in Scott Fishbowl, and I disagree with that logic. This is still a PPR league, still a PPR league. I understand that touchdowns are very important in this league. I understand that you get a 1/4 point per rushing attempt for your running backs. But I think there isn't as much of a difference between running back and wide receiver as people are thinking.
Nice.
And I believe that the best rosters will be, they won't be leaning one position or another. The fact that you only have to start 1 running back and everything else can be elite or can be a flex position. And because it's a super tight end premium league, I think the best tight ends are going to be gone real early. So I think the advantage with people thinking, hey, touchdowns are going to be more than what matters, and running backs are going to be more valuable with that rushing attempt bonus of a 1/4 point, that's going to eat into the PPR advantage for the wide receivers, that the wide receivers will fade in the draft a little bit after the elite few. I think that's where the strength is going to be. It's not based on any assumption that one position is going to score more than the other. It's the mentality of where those players will go in the draft. And I don't believe necessarily that the mock ADPs are always accurate when it comes to the Scott Fishbowl, because I think people are experimenting in the mock that they might not experiment in the real draft. There were some real drafts this weekend, Professor. The ADPs from the real drafts that occur before my draft will give me a little clue as to what is really happening. And comparing the ADP differences between the live drafts and the mock drafts is where I think the position edge advantage might be gained.
Well, I don't know where I can get those. If it's out there,
I'll get you the data.
We can compare that. We sure can.
Yeah. So we got our sources to get that ADP data. We'll be sharing that, and I'll be sharing some of my Scott Fishbowl philosophy, which is general enough that it's not giving away the farm, because I'm not saying take this player before this player. I'm just telling you my way of attempting to beat the Scott Fishbowl this year, which may or may not work. I'm honest enough to tell you that I'm not 100% sure. It's not like an FPPC league where we have years of data. We have only speculation when it comes to leagues that change their rules every year.
Agree. I do agree, Dennis. I look forward to our discussion, and I want you, like I said, crush them like bugs.
So head on over to the scienceoffantasyfootball.com. Check out all of the lesson plans from the professor. They will make you smarter. Check out my articles on my basic philosophy, and I've got some more articles coming this week. And then, of course, head on back here next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Get to work, folks.